Hey folks, happy Wednesday to you. Wednesday, January 13th. We continue our pastor's devotional this morning, or today. We are in the book of James, chapter 1. So go find the book of James. It's very late in the New Testament, just a couple books before the end of the New Testament. So James chapter 1, as you're finding that, let me just share a little bit about background about this book. And so there's a lot of questions about who wrote it. Was it James, brother of Jesus, or the James, son of Zebedee? So a number of different people named James in the New Testament account, though none of them super prominent. We don't believe that it was written by any of those people that are mentioned in the biblical account, and in part because the Greek is pretty advanced, and so really probably written by a native Greek speaker, and those people, those apostles of Jesus, would not have been native Greek speakers. It was very common in those days to write something like this in someone else's name. So for example, if I was going to write some murder, scary novel, I could write it in my name, and no one would read it, or I could say that it was written by Stephen King, and a whole lot of people would read it. Now, it wouldn't be as good, but it would catch their attention. That happened a lot in the ancient Near East. Lots of things were written in someone else's name to catch their attention, and it wasn't a way of trying to sort of like cheat the system, or to be dishonest. It was also a way to sort of say, this is what my lineage is. And so the person who's writing it very well could have learned from James, been a protege of James, or a couple of generations removed from James, but sort of learned through the school of Christianity that was James, and so writes it in that spirit. And so relatively late, it's written in Greek, it's written in advanced Greek. It is the name of James, probably not the biblical James, but someone who maybe was in that school of education that came from those apostles and those disciples by the name of James. And it's written a kind of like general exhortation to Christian people, addressed to the 12 tribes of the dispersion. So it's really addressed to Jewish people who have scattered throughout the ancient Near East, and they've moved west towards Rome, and they're living in all of these cities. And it's a general sort of exhortation to them, a bunch of kind of different pieces. You might think of it as maybe it's like a letter that the leader would write once a year, sort of encouraging the people and reminding the people. Or maybe it's like the sermon that the leader would preach. If the leader came and preached one sermon a year, this would be the sermon, and it contains all of these different pieces about ways to stay faithful amidst difficulties, right? Because there was both war and persecution, famine and hunger, and so it was a difficult time. And so if the leader was going to show up, these are all the different pieces that the leader would share, and that's sort of the nature of the letter of James. So let's hear this specific, James chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. But ask in faith, never doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For the doubter, being double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Back to 6. But ask in faith, never doubting. Now, I know sometimes that's difficult. We might be asking for a loved one to be cured of an advanced stage disease. We might be asking for peace to happen in our nation right now, which seems tenuous. We might be asking for something that's really beyond us, a kind of job or a kind of income or something that we're really not trained for and really in some ways have no business asking for. But it says, ask in faith, never doubting. Now, just because we ask doesn't mean it will be given. And certainly all of us can share witness of that. There are times that we prayed for something and maybe days or years later we look back and thought, oh, I'm so thankful God didn't answer that prayer. God knew better for me. But ask without doubting. Now, I would say let's be careful about talking about doubting. Is it wrong to question God? No. Is it wrong to wonder, like, where are you, God, amidst this? Why have you not spoken? No, I think all those are sort of faithful. It's kind of this wrestling with God. But the doubt comes in when we begin thinking about the way God provides, what we ought to be sure of. We may not always know how or why, but we ought to be sure that God provides for us. We don't doubt God's provisions. We might doubt how it happens. We might doubt God's timing, but we are not to doubt God's provisions for us. For that is the covenant, that is the promise that has been made. So as you think in your prayer life, as obviously you who are watching this are people of prayer and you're doing these devotions, and I commend you for that the difference between trusting in God's provisions and questioning sort of the way or the timing of all that, two very different things. We ask because we believe in God's goodness and God's provisions for us. I pray that in your prayer life today, that you would feel that kind of faith in God and trust in God's provisions. God bless. Have a great day.